Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. I'm doing a live intro. So part of the show growing is that we're going to do more of these kinds of things. Today's episode features a very good friend of mine, Peter Van Buren. Now, I saw Peter a couple weeks back in New York City, and it was exciting to get a chance to visit. We used to work in Iraq together and out in the eastern parts of the Baghdad province. And he wrote a book called We Meant Well. And if you guys haven't checked that out, please do. Also follow him on Facebook. A lot of great commentary from him on any kind of political topic or current event. So that's one of the reasons why I love him is he does all of these great things. He's a whistleblower from the State Department and has 24 years working abroad and just brings a lot of unique perspective to the world and to the things that we do. And just also, I just dig the dude. I mean, I've known him for over 10 years now, and he's just my kind of people, and I love hearing his point of view on things. So you're going to hear us talk about the COVID-19 crisis and response and what governments do. And look, he was there in Thailand when the tsunami hit in 2004. And he knows what these kind of big disasters look like from a national level and what it takes to respond to them. So I think he'll provide a unique and balanced and just rational perspective on what the heck is going on with these kind of things and what's normal and what's not. Hey, if you like what we do here at the Break It Down show, well, we'd love to have you subscribe. The show is getting bigger all the time. Those that you already have, thank you so much for doing all of that, all of the shares. I see you guys. If you're interested in buying shirts, there's shirts. We're going to get some more products and put them on the page at breakitdownshow.com. All of that's coming, and we're growing because of you. And if you're new, hey, welcome. 5 shows a week, a variety of topics. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's combat, sometimes it's artists, sometimes it's musicians. You just never know what you're going to get. The point is that we illustrate life around here, and life is varied and exciting. So hopefully you guys will appreciate that. One last note, and many of you know what I'm going to say next, but we have a very powerful charitable charter here, and we support Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Now look, you can contribute monthly with a small amount of money. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the donate tab, pick amount of money. Mine came out, I think, 2 days ago. My little contribution each month, making sure the lights stay on, that kind of thing. That's how you can help us. And if not us, find somebody else. If you're an adult and you're not contributing in some way to a charity, your time, your attention, your money, shares, all of these things, simply doing an errand for a charity, going to the airport, doing their errand list, like, hey, we got stuff to take to the post office. All of that stuff is valuable, and it's a form of service. All right. Enough of me talking about that. Hey, thanks for checking us out live. Now, Peter Van Buren.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Peter Van Buren. You're listening to the Break It Down show.
Peter and I go way back now. I can say way back, Peter, because it was in the late 2000s when we met, and you could say we worked kind of together on the same projects. I wouldn't say we worked together, but now, you know, we've reconnected over the past few years and had a chance to talk about a lot of different topics. But we also got to see each other face to face in New York City. How fun was that?
Yes. It was really interesting. I mean, there's something to be said in these times of social isolation, to de-isolate. I think it's going to be something we're going to come out of this current situation talking about, is where we need to we're social animals. I mean, it's the nature of humans. It's, you know, dogs got to sniff and humans got to mingle.
Yeah.
And we're going to come out of this talking about how much or how little of that we really do need in order to function well as a society and to be whole as people. This idea of this magic future where everything is online and people don't interact with each other face to face in meat space. I guess somebody's used that term. You know, that the idea that was sort of an ideal of the future is going to be chipped away at, and yeah. I think if we're lucky and if we're smart, we'll have a good discussion about all this. If we're not, we'll have a dumb discussion about all this. But let's hope for the good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can connect. Well, you know, here's an illustration of this. You know, you and I hadn't seen each other in 10 plus years, and we did, and we
Yeah.
had a great time. We also met someone else new. Josh from the Epoch Times came over, and we talked with him, and that was absolutely entertaining. And then I followed that trip up with, I went to Arizona, and I met someone who's been a fan of the show and a non face-to-face friend. But now, he and his wife and I are all friends because I went to their house and I stayed there. And this is all during the Corona thing. And I'm not making light of the Corona. I understand it's serious and all that stuff, but I also met Craig Sawman Sawyer, a SEAL Team 6 guy who's battling human trafficking. I met a UFC legend in Don Fry at his house in Sierra Vista, Arizona. I met Jay Dobbins, an ATF undercover agent, in his neighborhood. And I went to these folks and I got a chance to interact with them. And I'm just going to keep doing it. And if it turns out to be a bad thing, then I'll accept the consequences. But I just don't see... I don't operate that way via distance like that. I need to be in the space with a person.
I'm amazed I'm on your show. If you actually hang out with all those people, I'm trying to figure out where I fit in. I mean, were they all busy or something today? Is that what how I ended up here?
Yeah. Also, Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock is a UFC, and his nickname is the Legend. So.
Okay, well, I hang out with important people all the time as well. I just can't remember their name. My girlfriend lives in Canada. That's why she's not here.
Right, he lives in Canada.
All right, well, fine. I tell everybody that I got to hang out with Pete Turner. So,
yeah, there you go. The point is not the names. The point is just I'm not going to fear interaction. I'm going to be respectful of the people that have to be careful and everything else. But ultimately, I survive on human interaction, and I need to have those things.
Well, and we all do. That's the thing. As I said, we're social animals. It's programmed into us. We have such an extraordinary ability to read faces and see what people are thinking and listen for subtleties. And how much of that gets lost when you go online is unclear, but some of it does. Yeah. And I think we crave that missing piece, and we often are very casual about saying, well, we don't really need that, or hey, if we're talking, we're talking. What does it matter whether there's a bit of technology in between us or not? But I don't know that that's actually true. I think there's something very human about communicating face to face. If you want to talk about pheromones and things in the air, then we can talk. There's some of that out there as well. But at the end of this all, particularly education, I think there's going to be a bit of a reckoning. I hope there's an intelligent reckoning about what we gain by interacting with each other in person, so that we, first of all, treasure it. Second of all, so that as we go forward, we make sure that the cure is never worse than the disease. The time for that is not in the middle of the fight. I mean, right now, this is all very unknown, and it's not the time to figure these things out. But at some point in the future, we need to look back. I hope we look back and say, okay, well, we did this, and this. Of those three things, which one actually helped slow the disease, and which one actually did some damage to us as a society, as people? I think that's worth doing, and with a little luck, it will inform us in the future as we make decisions. What I fear is that we won't do that. That we'll either just sort of announce, "Hey, I guess this is over now. Please, go back and resume your normal programming," or we'll kind of congratulate ourselves and say, we whooped it, and everything will get equal credit in the deal, and the playbook will be sort of written for next time around without that thought. I also don't think that it's a problem talking about these things. You can hold two ideas in your head simultaneously, that we should be social distancing and doing all this stuff, but at the same time asking questions about it. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think it's wrong to sort of put down notes of saying, well, we don't know what role testing did or didn't play in this, but let's look at that in the future. I don't think there's anything wrong about putting that marker down and holding these ideas simultaneously. We'll see how successful we are in it. unfortunately, there are lots of people who are looking to take advantage of all this. You read op-eds, and basically whatever goofy idea someone had 6 months ago, they're now trying to figure out how to get it squeezed through because of coronavirus. So universal, again, I'm not going to go, I'm not going through these as like, oh, they're all good or they're all bad, but I mean, whatever you had of ideas about universal income or health care or voting Republican or voting Democrat or online or offline education. Everybody's now taking those ideas and repackaging them as in the guise of Corona, and trying to push those things through. It gets as silly here in New York City as this great uproar over alternate side parking, which I believe is kind of a New York thing. You've traveled a little bit. I mean, do you know what I'm talking about
Yeah.
here?
That's a thing
So
now?
it's a big thing. Yes, it's a Corona thing. So for those of you who live in the civilized world, here in the People's Republic of New York, we have this very complicated deal where you can only park on certain sides of the street certain days so that street cleaning equipment can get through and clean the streets, all for the good. I mean, and that, but it's like one of those things that everybody hates. And the people who have wanted to do away with it for a very long time have now seized on the coronavirus as an excuse and saying, well, if everybody has to go out and move their cars at the same time, then doesn't that sort of force us into close proximity? And isn't that bad? So shouldn't we do away with this idea? Um, the same thing with the e-bikes.
Oh my God.
The deliveries here in the city, food delivery is usually done by short people from Central and South America who ride bicycles. Doesn't make sense to deliver by car in this dense population. And these guys have these. A lot of them have these bikes that are half bike, half motorcycle, I guess. They have a battery. They're
Yeah.
called e-bikes, and the city, for some reason, has made this, a crusade over the last year or two to get rid of them. They claim they're dangerous because they go too fast, and whatever. Um, and there was a big fight about whether we should suspend enforcement of the e-bike laws during this crisis to aid the delivery of food. And the mayor ruled on this and issued an executive order that we're going to not punish e-bike users until the crisis is over. And so everybody's got their own little thing that they're trying to connect on. It's a lot like when Congress adds unrelated amendments to bills.
One thing I have noticed, at least from my perception, and I'm not a big news watcher, so, don't be surprised if I'm totally wrong on this, but it does seem as though the inflamed political attitude we've had recently has been absorbed a little bit by the no shit importance of dealing with this crisis. And, like Floridians don't often know how to shelter in place already, and we get all freaked out because they don't evacuate, and they're like, but my house is made out of cement. My window can take 500-mile-an-hour, winds. I already have everything. A lot of us here in California are supposed to already be ready. We've got, supplies. I'm not saying us specifically, but in general, like we have a lot of water in our communities, like in our pool, now you just need a way to filter it. Well, we have those things. So a lot of this resilience is already built in, but it seems like that the machine is so worried about, trying to sort this out that, like, when we see Gavin Newsom speaking, he's our governor in California. He's hoarse. The guy from the NIH is just like, I'm not trying to talk, because they just have been talking and staying up for hours. So they are definitely taking it seriously. And it kind of, to some extent, seems to have reduced the rhetoric around, President Trump and politics and you're evil and Nazis and that kind of thing.
I'd like to hope that was going to happen. I'd like to agree with you, but I don't know that I see that.
Okay.
At least the media that I take a look at. And I, here in New York, the majority of the media that I'm exposed to tends to be kind of left of center, particularly the New York Times. And they're in full mode of finding ways to use this to elect a Democrat. They spent a lot of time in the last week or two explaining why Bernie Sanders was going to kill us all, and advocating for Joe Biden. And they have spent a lot of time and a lot of editorial space and a lot of news space, unfortunately, as well, trying to tell us that Donald Trump is a danger. If you look at for example, the editorial page here, they've got on the opinion page, they've got give every American $2,000 immediately. Next one down, I'm a doctor in Britain. We're heading into the abyss. Next one, the era of small government is over. Next one, cancel the Olympics. Next one, my country's healthcare system may soon collapse. One after that, I'm reading headlines here. Why the coronavirus is so much worse than September 11th. Next one after that, how racist is Trump's Republican Party? Last one, this is, of course, Tom Friedman, who's never met something that isn't a crisis. Our new historical divide, BCAC, the world before Corona and the world after. They are not missing an opportunity to remind us that the end of the world is coming quickly. There's articles on the business pages that are talking about not recession, but depression. They're misquoting the Secretary of the Treasury, talking about 20% unemployment, which is basically what we were looking at in the 1930s in the United States. There is a very much an ongoing sense in that sliver of the media, or that chunk of the media, to make this seem as bad as it is and a little bit worse, and to put the blame on Donald Trump personally for I guess not coming here and sucking the virus out of my lungs personally. It becomes a little bit troublesome to read because, first of all, as I said, I mean, there's time for looking back and seeing who made mistakes. You don't do that in the middle of the fight, number one. But number two, there's an element of, if it's wrong to give people false hope, I think it's equally wrong to give them false fear.
Right.
We are all facing decisions that we make about how to interact with each other, what to do, how to behave, if you will. And some of those decisions may get a little nasty. And if we are in an unfairly fearful state, we're going to make bad decisions. I recently wrote an article for the American Conservative looking back at the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and citing specific examples where dumb decisions were made because people were in fear. And there was just a lot of dimensions to that. I mean, most people who lived through it, and a lot of people who have gone back and looked at it, are well aware that the Reagan administration delayed funding for research on AIDS, believing it to be primarily a gay problem and therefore not of particular interest to them. That's a good example of, I guess, inverse fear. But I was also able to tease out that a lot of gay activists attempted to exaggerate the fear. So the idea is AIDS is coming for you, hetero people, and as a way of trying to engage middle America in funding the disease. And when they sort of succeeded, and the federal government started turning on the money flow, what happened is an awful lot of funding got diverted into areas of low risk among heterosexual populations, among women, things like that. And it got diverted out of the communities that needed it the most because they had, in fact, been successful in panicking people in Middle America, and they wanted their share of the funding devoted to their fears. And it really set things back quite a ways. You can see that even today, in that there are certain illnesses, AIDS is primary, cancer certainly, that absorb an enormous amount of funding relative to their impact on society. There's not a lot of money that finds its way into diabetes and obesity research in relation to how much money goes into AIDS, for example, which has now gratefully become a manageable public health problem, not an epidemic. Um, but so this idea of managing by fear, of trying to manipulate people through fear, has a bad history. It's one we can document. If you move out of the healthcare field and talk about the aftermath of September 11th, you get a perfect example where the United States was basically the people where we were talked into a state of learned helplessness and allowed the government, no, I think actually demanded the government strip away an extraordinary number of our civil rights. We gave up the right to privacy as part of the response to September 11th. The massive NSA spying on all Americans was created in that aftermath to find the terrorists. And we not only allowed it to happen, we sort of wanted it to happen. The same thing with a lot of First Amendment rights, the Obama's war on whistleblowers. These things were all outgrowths of the climate of fear that was created post 9/11. And you know, if you want to get weird and call it a conspiracy theory or paranoia, you're welcome to do so. But the historical record is very straightforward that a climate of fear existed. Within that climate of fear, the government basically tore up the first half of the Bill of Rights. And the American people not only accepted it, they almost demanded that it happened. A vast majority of Americans were happy that we were torturing people, that we had an offshore penal colony in Guantanamo. Both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan had wide support. The questions didn't really get asked too closely, and they still are kind of muddled in history. Fear is the worst possible way to make a decision, a good decision. But it's an old tried and true that if you can get the people scared, if you can get them feeling helpless, they will look for a leader. Unfortunately, we end up with people like George W. Bush or Jim Jones, or maybe you want to include Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the rhetoric doesn't stop. It just seems to have deflated a little bit. But you're right. All of this stuff about, well, I mean, gosh, look, the Democratic Party, desperate to get President Trump out of office, is going to select Joe Biden as someone who's. I mean, I don't understand how that works, and I guess they're using this opportunity as much as possible to weaponize Corona to accomplish their ends. And, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. I'm not going to vote for Bernie Sanders. I probably won't vote for President Trump, but don't tell me that Joe Biden is somehow the answer to our problems. I mean, the guy he's just not healthy. There's no way I can convince that guy's brain works,
He's the answer to the question if you ask the question the right way. I want to just take a step back and say that we're recording this on March 18th about midday, and I'm just looking at the latest statistics, and there have been 117 deaths in the United States from the coronavirus. Now, somebody just said in your vast audience, but we're not testing. We don't really know. Not testing is clearly a bad way to figure out how many people are infected. Absolutely. If you don't test, you don't know. However, what happens in real life is, whether you test or not, as people get seriously sick, they present themselves at hospitals and healthcare providers.
Right.
And whether you're testing or not, it's pretty obvious what's going on. More importantly, perhaps tragically, dead bodies are hard to ignore. And so while someone can sit and say, well, we're not testing, so we estimate that there are X thousand undiscovered cases roaming around.
Yes.
You can say anything you want because there's no information, so you can make up any number you want, but you can't say there are X 10,000s of people who died from corona out there, because the bodies would start to be noticeable.
Right.
We had a rule of thumb. One of my jobs at the State Department, we occasionally were dealt with missing persons cases. 99.9% of the time, it was Mr. English teacher who forgot to call mom, one of those kind of things. But
Yeah.
What I would say, if I could find the right way to say it, is the real tragedy it probably hasn't happened because somebody notices in a first world country where I was, somebody's going to notice a dead foreigner. And if he's in the hospital, somebody's going to be looking around for somebody to pay that bill, if nothing else. And so the chances that he's in the hospital seriously injured or dead are very small, because somebody would let us know. And that's the same thing with the coronavirus. Yes, of course, without testing, we can't put an accurate figure on the number of infections, but we can make some statements about the number of dead, because they tend to be a little more obvious. And we're not, at this moment in time, seeing these vast numbers. I mean, 117 dead, nobody's happy about that number, but realistically, it's very, very small. And it's absolutely infinitesimal in regards to what we are doing in reaction to it. It's been beaten to death, but between October and February, close to 10,000 Americans have died of the regular flu. Many of them elderly people, and our ability to truly not care about 10,000 deaths is staggering to me. Of course, I mean, we simply don't care.
Yeah.
Yet we're basically rewiring our entire society, including the economy, the education system, the healthcare system, the way we do government, the powers that we grant government, over what currently is 117 deaths. Now, that's got to go up about 10 times before it reaches the death toll that the flu has enacted. And we're not even starting to talk about the number of people who are dying out there of heart attacks and car accidents. I mean, a lot of people die all the time. 117 deaths by itself in isolation is as close to irrelevant as you can, without being too cruel as a human being. So we want to.
Well, I do want to say this, and I want to ask you. Every year, ish, 5,000 people die from choking. Right. So what's your over under? Is it going to be more or less than that? And obviously, look way into it. We're not trying to make light of it, but when we do look at this, do you recall the Thailand tsunami in 2004? I
was there.
Yeah, they quit talking about how many people died because it was horrible, and now you have to well, that same week we where I was in Iraq, they blew up a chow hall and a bunch of people died there. Yeah. But as soon as that happened, it was like 250,000 people had died, and we,
well, I was in Thailand as part of the State Department's response. The joke is that's the only time that's when the State Department finally sent me to Phuket was during that. I mean, but the scale of death was staggering. But at the end of it all, The estimates were below 10,000.
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
The estimates were below 10,000. And, you know, those numbers are you get pretty accurate, because what happens is people go looking for each other. Somebody's looking for you. And if we can't find you, eventually we move you into the probable death category.
Right.
We take those numbers and we look at them compared to the what we do know. We've got this many bodies, we've got this many limbs, we've got this many cars that never were moved from the parking lots. You do a lot of things to come up with these numbers. It's not just a bunch of us sitting around a room 3 beers in saying, I don't know, can you live with 8,000 people? Are we done here? It's not that way. You say, look, we've got this many missing persons reports out there. We've got this many unidentified bodies. We've got this many identified bodies. We've got this many pieces, arms or legs or what have you, that, but most humans only have 2 arms. So, I mean, we can start to do math on this, and we can put a range. You can also look around and see, are there a lot of people missing an arm? That would factor into. I don't mean to make a joke of that, but for example, in a plane crash where limbs are torn off but people do survive, that becomes a valuable metric. But at the end of it all, there's a lot of that goes into saying that maybe that Asian tsunami killed about 8,000 people. Putting an over under on the virus right now it's early days and all that good stuff. But its scale and perspective are very, very, very important here. And measuring the reaction to that likely scale, and also, again, circling back, asking the question of, are we crossing a line or lines where we're doing more harm than good with our mitigation efforts?
Right.
For example, let's get serious about this.
All right.
If we would have dropped an atomic bomb on Wuhan in February, there'd be no coronavirus problem.
Right.
If the city of New York shoots the next 1,000 people who become infected in the head, we're going to put this virus to bed in a week. So, I mean, that's where the line really is out there. Now, obviously, we're not doing that. Most of these ridiculous scenarios that you see, where you've got people on CNN talking about millions dead, are studies that have been done in the absence of any mitigation, that are valuable for scientists to kind of set outer boundaries. Well, the idea is I cough on two people and they cough on 2 people, and those 8 people cough on 2 people, right? I mean, within a couple of days, everybody in America is infected, and they come up with this number. Some could be as many as 70 million Americans. Well, those are useful for statistical purposes and to set out of boundaries, but the reality is that there are going to be mitigating factors in there, and some of those are human-made, like social isolation or atomic bombs, and some of them may have to do with immunities. They may have to do with the weather, for example, and things like that. So we got to keep all of this there and make sure we're staying as much as we can within the white lines, and especially after it's over, going back and taking a careful look at everything we did and making sure we don't learn the wrong lessons, or don't have the wrong lessons fed to us by people who realized, as for example George Bush did after Dick Cheney after 9/11, how easy it was to do these things. I've always been of the mind that if I could get Dick Cheney on the waterboard myself, and say, Dick, what was? I'd have a lot of things to talk about with him, but one of the things that I think he would end up admitting was he would probably say we didn't go far enough.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't realize how easy it was going to be to convince Americans to go along with all this stuff, and we underplayed it. We were hesitant. If we would have realized how easy it was going to be to manipulate Americans' fear, we would have done so many more things than we actually got away with. The torture program would have been huge. The spying programs would have been far more comprehensive. We would have, because we would have gotten away with it all. We just didn't realize at the time it was going to be that easy. And I don't want that to be the lesson that politicians and certain big business owners walk away from Corona with. That, hey, it was pretty easy to do this. We convinced Americans voluntarily to give up their jobs, which is what has been done.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and put educations on hold.
Put education on hold. Now, what we did in America was, in the course of about a week, we more or less, and we'll see where this works out quality-wise, but I mean, we basically converted our entire curriculum to an online version, and we did it in a week, and we convinced our teachers to do that for free.
Right.
That's kind of a big thing. If 6 months ago the president announced, I want to get rid of, should I do the voice? I want to get rid of in-person classrooms. I think it's tremendous waste of money. We can do better than this. Teachers, I don't think we really need as many as we have. Whatever. I was practicing Bernie too, but I guess that's no longer really that useful. If 6 months ago Donald Trump had said, we want to get rid of all in-person classes, K through college, and I want the current instructors at each of these institutions to develop the online version of their classes in a week for free. And I don't want to hear from teachers' unions or anybody else about any of this stuff, or parents. People would have gone insane. They would have burned the White House down.
Yes.
Instead, last week, that's exactly what happened. And I can't imagine that the people who do budgets and pay for schools and for-profit colleges and everybody else hasn't taken note of this. And I just wonder what we'll come back to. I mean, what will the lesson be?
And then creating your own economy I don't want to say to accomplish a political goal, but if you shut down all of these organizations, they don't have a budget for losing a quarter of their income,
right?
Because you just shut these things down. Like it's a substantial problem. And I guess you can't hedge, but also we don't know what a hedge is. Like, how do you, like, we were talking about 2 weeks. Now we're talking 3 months for a lot of things.
Right.
I'm not going to sit in my house for 3 months. I'm not going to do it. They can throw me in jail, and then they'll have to let me go because it's too dangerous to be in jail. Life has to continue.
Well, where are you going to go, Pete?
Anywhere I fucking want. I don't know. I'm in America.
No. But I mean, the thing is, where are you going to go? I mean, if you come visit us here in New York, the stores are all pretty much the stores are closed right now. All the retail stores are closing early.
Right.
The restaurants, the bars, the cafes are all closed. The theaters are all closed. For what it's worth, Broadway is all closed. I'm free to leave my house, but there's not a whole hell of a lot I can go out and do. Walking in the park is great, but it has its limits. So, I mean, you can go out, but where are you going to go and what you going to do?
Well, I think that there's, the more the government clamps down, the more folks are going to do things like whatever, start up a speakeasy or whatever it is. If this
Yeah.
thing really goes on for 3 months, there will be people that are like, I'll make money by doing this, let them come and catch me. And next thing you know, you'll have people out enjoying a gray market lifestyle, I guess, maybe is what I would say to that.
The thing is that while I don't want to be the angel of doom, but I mean, what that does is create a couple of problems. I mean, first of all,
Okay.
it creates this two-track society where you've got people who are clever enough or have the money to enjoy those things. We saw that during Prohibition. And so
Right.
basically, the poor people couldn't get alcohol or had to settle for bathtub rot. And the
Mm-hmm.
rich people basically didn't change their lifestyle at all. So you do that. The other thing is you create this whole new avenue of enforcement where the government can crack down when and where it wants to on basically anybody at any time. There's going to be a reason to do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking about black markets and speakeasies and this
Yes.
whole thing. And so at any point in time where the government decides that they're kind of bored with the Break It Down show, they can
Yeah.
arrest you for going out and buying black market hamburger. Um, and if you don't think it's true, then you just have to go back and look at the way that this was done in the old Soviet Union, in the communist countries, where
Mm.
basically there was always an excuse to arrest someone for something at any time, and
Mm-hmm.
they kind of left you grateful if you got away with it, or things like that. It's a hell of a way to live. I don't think it's a very good way to live, and I mean, you know, I worry that when these folks realize how easy it was to get these massive societal changes in place, they're not going to very readily give up that power. Power tends to not flow that direction.
Right.
Um,
Right.
we've long since gotten past worrying about the terrorists, but yet the surveillance and stuff all continues out
It
there.
remains right.
Yeah. And so, out of an abundance of caution, the following things are going to be kept in place for a couple of extra months after Corona's gone. Or
Right.
the first time somebody sneezes again in October, we're going to lock everything back down. Uh, I am just deeply concerned because I don't see power working in the opposite direction. I always see power accumulating. We started this little chunk of our conversation though with Joe Biden,
Yeah.
and I want to go back to Joe Biden because I mean we made a joke about who does Joe Biden's what need does Joe Biden satisfy, right? I mean
Yeah. Right.
you've got all these different things, and at the end of this primary process, the Democrats kind of cough up Joe Biden. Progressivism, for all its good and bads and everything, whatever. We're not even going to talk about that anymore. We're not going to sift through the ideas and say, well, which ones were really pretty good and which ones were kind of kooky. Nah, we're going to have Joe Biden. And, the candidate from 1958, your dad's candidate. And that's exactly the point. We are Americans. We are cowed and sheeped so easily that in the between the dual fear of Donald Trump, which has been fanned by the media for several years, and now the corona, which actually has enough reality to it that it can't be dismissed the way the goofiness of Russiagate was, then people are running for cover. And what they want is to pull the blankets over their head and make the bad man go away. And
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden is exactly that candidate. He is he's essentially campaigned on the theme of I'm not going to do anything. I mean, that's what he's done. He said, I'll untangle some of the stuff you don't like about Trump. we'll let transgender people back in the gosh darn military, and those kind of things. He'll untangle some of that. But basically, what Biden has campaigned on is the unofficial slogan of "I'm not going to do anything." All that change stuff that the progressives were talking about, not for Joe. All this right wing change stuff that Trump has been, nope, not for Joe. I'm just gonna be a caretaker. I'm gonna be the Gerald Ford of your generation, millennials. And I'm gonna be comforting, and I'm gonna say the right things, and Obama's gonna pass me notes about how to phrase stuff so it'll sound comforting. And for 4 years, everybody can stay in bed and binge watch Netflix. Basically, that's
good.
that's the Biden campaign promise, and
Right.
people, I think, are going to eat it up. I think he's got a very strong theme there.
What about when he forgets where he is or says things that are patently ridiculous, and Donald Trump has no problem calling him on it? I mean,
Yeah, well, no. Obviously, I'm being somewhat facetious here, but no, you bring up a real point. Joe Biden was born during World War II. He was born in 1942. He was alive during World War II. That's like a long time ago.
Yeah.
He's been in government since I've been in high school. No, I take that back. I was in junior high school when Joe first served an elected position. He has been around a really, really long time. Those of any of us and our listeners who have parents or dear relatives who are in their late 70s, we all know what happens to them. Some do better than others. My father, God bless him, is in his 80s but has severe Alzheimer's. We don't trust him to drive a car or make decisions about his medication. And you're telling me that someone who's in his peer group is going to be president of the United States, or the alternative is somebody who's 4 years younger. Or, no, yeah, 4 years younger than that, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Trump was born in 1946. That is a bad situation.
It is
and
a
I
bad
worry
situation.
A lot. I don't necessarily, I wasn't thrilled about having somebody who, was Pete Buttigieg's age or anything either. I think there's a value to experience, but there's a point where that old bell curve kicks in and wisdom starts to taper off into you're wearing diapers. and I think, we got 330 million people in this country. This is what we ended up with, was the candidate from 1958.
Yeah, it's not a good thing, and you're right. Having and we've talked about this before. Like, when was, if ever, the last time that you're like, I just can't decide. Both these candidates are so great. Their visions of the future and their programs. I just can't wait. I wish one would be vice president, and instead, Joe Biden is committed to picking a female for vice president. And God bless, great, that's fantastic. But that's probably, if he gets elected, he may not even survive the campaign. He just, a person of that age, a multi-system failure is one slip and fall away. You break your hip, and most people who break their hip at that age are dead within 2 years. There's a lot of problems to being that age and doing a job that's that challenging.
I absolutely agree with you, and I remain deeply, deeply concerned. He's one episode of pneumonia away, one slip and fall away. His cognitive decline is evident. It's a tough job. We've all seen those photos, the before and after pictures of presidents, and how even 4 years in the White House ages them.
Right.
And that is a huge concern with Biden. It's obvious that he doesn't have the stamina. He doesn't have the cognitive processing. He's kind of stuck in the past. I mean, do all these people voting for him not have grandpas who rattle on about the good old days and tell stories from their youth? It's kind of cute when grandpa tells the same story every Thanksgiving, but I don't necessarily think he's the right guy to be in charge of the complexities of our nation. And that's who the Democrats have kind of shoved in our faces and said, well, it's either him or Trump. Your call. I just can't believe we couldn't have done better. And the sop of, well, hey, between us, I don't think Joe's going to make it 4 years. So you're really voting for this woman he's going to choose as vice president. I'm not entirely happy about that, which is a subtext of this election. It's like, if you don't think Joe's going to last the 4 years, maybe get somebody else.
Is there a candidate from the Democratic Party that you would be interested in voting for?
I'd like to pretend we just had an audio problem, so I couldn't have heard that question. And you were saying, what's the weather here in New York? No, the problem is that they all carried. I wanted to like Bernie so much. Mm-hmm. There were times when I heard him speaking about economic inequality where I just thought, my goodness, that's exactly right. And he's the only person who seems to be able to see past his own desire to be elected. He's the only one that seems to have the ability to think bigger than himself, to see, mm-hmm. to realize that there are, it's not that his job as president is not just to sit there and wait for the next thing to happen. He's not like the fire department where they just sit at the station and wait for the bell to ring. He had the ability to be a leader, and I wanted to love him for that. And then, just as I was kind of feeling my heart rate go up, he'd uncork something like, and then we're going to have free childcare for everybody in America, and we're going to forgive all the loans, and we're going to send everybody a basket of flowers or edible fruits, whichever they want, and it's going to, and suddenly we just spun off into crazy land.
Yeah. And
it's like, Bernie, there's got to be an alternative between doing nothing and this kooky stuff where you have there's no realistic way to pay for all those things.
Right.
It's simply not going to happen. I kept waiting to hear Bernie say something like, I'm going to, have 2 less aircraft carrier groups, and we're going to use that to fund a college education or something. And then we could at least argue over that. Okay, should we get rid of 2 aircraft carrier groups? Should we get rid of 1? Should we build 3 extra? We could at least have something. But he never even got that far with it. It was just, we're going to have all this free stuff, and we're going to basically solve our healthcare problem by converting our entire economic system to something different. And it's like, no, we don't want that. We just want to be able to go to the freaking doctor. We don't necessarily need you to reinvent the entire economic functioning of the United States. So in the end, to answer your question, I couldn't find anyone there that I supported strongly. I would have been more amenable to hold my nose and vote for maybe even Bernie. I don't know. Some of the other ones, I never paid enough attention to them. Klobuchar, who I know a lot of people like, I never paid enough attention because I knew she was never going to get through the primary process. So I wasn't really going to waste a lot of my time on that. There were a lot of folks at the beginning, a lot of those kind of, I can't even, did you know that at the beginning of the primary, there were 30 Democrats running? I just had to look that up for an article I was writing. I mean, I saw the whole list. I couldn't even picture more than about half of them. Never mind tell you something about them. But there were a lot of these kind of bland-looking governors or ex-governors that we never really learned anything about. We never heard anything about. We never got a chance to evaluate them because the Democratic Party was in a big hurry to thin that crowd out. Um, and they wanted to thin it out in a certain way so that it was the rainbow group up there. And so those guys just got very quickly pushed off, quite literally pushed off the stage. Now, did one of them have something to say that I didn't catch? Maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the problem is to rise up. You've got to come through a system that ultimately corrupts the person who's there, so that you do have someone that's not. The character is always tough. To maintain character and become that influential. I wanted to just get your final thoughts on when we look at someone like President Trump and we have this national, worldwide crisis.
Yeah.
We continue to think that he is somehow the king, and that there's someone at the CDC with the truck running at all times prepared to respond to any crisis. The ability to do these things it's not, you can't prepare for every contingency. So having tests available, okay, great. Maybe Korea was able to solve that problem quickly, but for the most part, no one else is able to do that because you just can't account for all these things. And if you do, you look at the CDC and you say, what the fuck are you doing? You're spending $10 billion a year with guys in trucks with the engines running to respond to a crisis that isn't here,
Right. People have this image that there's these giant warehouses, and there's a whole row of shelves, here's the coronavirus and here's this thing and here's that thing. And it's all available at the flip of a switch, and it's all ready to go. I used to run into this overseas where there would be some crisis, sometimes a large-scale crisis like the Asian tsunami, sometimes something localized. And the first thing Americans would do would be want to know what time the Marines are landing, and when is dinner being served, and they would have this idea that there are resources, amazing resources that are on call 24/7, immediately available, and will solve whatever problem, crisis, or inconvenience is in front of us. And as you know, and as you just correctly pointed out, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And people are remarkably intolerant of delays. You see it a lot. I was working on an article about looking back at the hurricane response in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. And I had done a lot of disaster crisis management stuff with the State Department and got along with the people from FEMA and stuff like that, and learned a lot about what they do. And the thing that they always say is on day one, you start with resources 0, problems 100.
Right.
And that's when everybody is screaming. And of course, there's this kind of there's this thing that goes on where resources go up, problems go down, and things get fixed. And it's a known process, and it takes time. And the one thing that the media nowadays doesn't ever do is acknowledge that time element. It's like, well, why can't there be infinite supplies here infinitely quickly? And essentially, if it isn't back to normal today, why won't it be by tomorrow?
Right.
And that is what you always face in these crisis situations. And I think if I have to criticize Trump at all, is that the guy just isn't good at public speaking. He doesn't have that. Pence is a little bit better. They honestly should have hired Morgan Freeman to do this. And I'm only half kidding. I mean, it's not like Trump is universally popular, right? I mean, so we already know that, a good half of the country hates his guts to begin with. And love him or hate him, he's just not good at this cuddly feely thing that we seem to want out of our leaders. I honestly think they should have hired Morgan Freeman, and he just could have come out there and said in his nice, comforting voice the stuff that we all seem to want to hear. I mean, we got Barack Obama built a legacy on being good at that, right?
Yeah.
Like he would go out, there'd be a mass shooting, and he would show up and say nice things. And everyone said, "Oh, I feel so much better," without noticing. It's like, hey, isn't that his third mass shooting this month? Aren't there a lot of mass shootings? Holy shit, we should probably be paying attention to mass shootings. Instead, it's like, man, that guy sounds great. I feel so much better now. If that's what we want, then fine, let's get that. You know, if not more, I don't know, Morgan Freeman, I don't know. Is he a political guy? Does he have issues? So, I mean, if not.
Yeah. You just write a bigger check. Everybody all of a sudden
is that how
an advocate.
Whatever. I mean, we're good at this. Just get any of those people who reads the local news, who has one of those nice baritone voices. I mean, you don't even have to put them on camera, or her, and then we'd solve that problem right there. Because Trump just isn't good at that. But otherwise, I don't know that I want to put him up against the wall because there weren't enough tests, or we didn't take the WHO test when the Chinese one failed. You know, all this complicated questioning. Yeah. I don't think it's time to put anybody against the wall for that.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, in terms of being the president, you know, you want the president to deal with presidential level problems, you know, and someone's going to say, hey, this is looking pretty serious. You get to say, let's wait and see. I mean, it can turn out to be bad, but it's also an appropriate response to go, we've got other fires that are more important that are right here in front of us. Oh, and by the way, I'm trying to get reelected. Always kind of a funny thing. But yeah, like it's I submit that if President Obama had done the exact same play-for-play response in the coronavirus, everything would be just fine. Everybody would be like, it's totally fine. He's doing a great job. But because of the guy we have.
You're cheating, right? You're baiting me here. Is that correct? Because we all know what happened in 2009 with the swine flu, the H1N1, which was under Barack Obama's administration. It took him 7 months to declare a state of emergency. When the crisis began, he had no one in charge of CDC. He had no one in the position of Health and Human Services. FEMA was still being reconstructed after the Bush administration kind of messed it up and left it to die in the aftermath of Katrina. And over 10,000 people died of swine flu before it got under control. Obama never closed the border with Mexico, which is where the virus was coming from. He didn't do any of those things. By those standards, by Trump standards, you would have to say Obama did a terrible job. Now, I'm not making that claim. I think he did an adequate job because that's the best you can kind of do in these situations. But I mean, if you applied the standards that are being applied to Trump to Obama's swine flu, you realize he did a terrible job if you're using those same standards. It is all about politics and the way we're looking at this. As I said, right now, there are 10 times more people out there dead from regular flu than from coronavirus. If we don't care about them, we got to ask ourselves, why are we caring so much about this and so little about them, or vice versa? And unfortunately, the answers are that we're being manipulated and we're participating in that manipulation. And bad voices and actors will find a way to take advantage of that.
Well, listen, man, I appreciate you coming on. It was great to see you in New York. Let's have another chat again soon. And thanks for bringing some reason and some calm in this crazy, crazy world, because I definitely much appreciate it.
Let's keep at this. There'll be a lot more to talk about. Take care.